Chapter 33. Italy. Bianchi's Villa. You've known all along, and yet you've let this circus roll right through town. Why? Pilgrim demanded of Bianchi. She'd returned to Bianchi's villa with Baxter. Dashwood and Brian were waiting at the local airport ready to take on whatever was thrown at them. She'd been surprised by the appearance of Hansford, who'd sauntered up to her, brazenly kissing her cheek and scowling at Baxter. Baxter was nobody's fool, but the saying, "Two's company and three's a crowd," meant to him that Hansford should back off. His presence would distract Pilgrim, making her vulnerable, Baxter told himself. To Pilgrim, locating the liquid door at this point was incidental in bringing the Titan behind it out for her to deal with. They'd been ushered into Bianchi's villa by Max, who told them Signor Bianchi could be found upstairs in Donata's bedroom. They'd found him sitting quietly, gazing out of the bedroom window. He'd answered resignedly, "I had to be sure the body I brought home for burial was my Donata. You don't know what these people are capable of." "Which one of them is it?" Pilgrim asked. "I don't know. But they can't hurt me any more. My daughter is dead, and I won't be long in following her. Not out of choice, but out of necessity." "I can help you," she offered. "For the rest of my life?" Bianchi scoffed. She knew he was right. "We're going to need to take a look at Donata's house," Baxter stated. "There's nothing there. I've already been through the place, and so has Hansford," he answered angrily. "Even so," Pilgrim said impatiently. She found Bianchi's reticence to help them annoying, but understandable. Bianchi was consumed by Donata's death. She knew only too well how she'd react if someone she cared about was taken from her. The first thing she'd do to the person responsible would be to tear them apart, slowly. "We need to go. Just give me the key and we'll do the rest," she said. Bianchi stared at her, knowing it'd be useless to argue. He felt in his pocket, pulling out the front door key for Donata's house, and handed it over. Max escorted them out. Reaching the hallway towards the front of the villa, Pilgrim slowed as she came upon a large oil painting commanding the entrance. "When I was here last, I noticed this painting of the girl standing outside the gates of the castle, being watched by the guards," she said contemplatively. "It's a Siglioni. Signor Bianchi has another in the dining room." "Max, do you know anything else about this painting?" He was stumped by the question, mentally dragging up anything about it he might remember. I think the girl is Ariana, but, he shrugged his shoulders at the limited extent of his knowledge. Baxter stepped forward, asking, "Ready?" Pilgrim asked, "Baxter, what do you think of this painting?" He immediately sensed this wasn't a pedantic question, plus he recognized the painting as one of Siglioni's masterpieces. His years of traipsing round museums, waiting for various principals, had given him a broad, if not in-depth, appreciation of art. "It's Ariana. The painting tells the story of a daughter who leaves the family home, taking with her the Stone of Hades. A sentinel of Hades is sent to destroy the castle to obtain it." She looked pointedly at him. "You're thinking it has something to do with Donata's murder," he concluded. "I think Donata was killed because she discovered the liquid door. It's the only explanation that fits," Pilgrim said. "She would have told her father," Baxter answered. "Perhaps she did." The idea that Bianchi might be somehow implicated in the murder of his daughter was shocking in the extreme. Baxter asked, "So why would she take off to England?" "To draw someone away," Pilgrim suggested. "Donata flees to England, probably pursued by the person who killed her. She'd have taken something significant to entice them away from her father, Baxter said. Evidence of the liquid door? Evidence the liquid door exists? The parchment? Pilgrim concluded. My question is, Baxter said, why the Titans are remotely interested in it. What, are they bored? He said, exasperated. Some may argue it's hardly worthwhile for the Titans to even bother with the liquid door, and on a monetary level that's true, Pilgrim added. However, we know it's not always about the money. For them it's the chase, the intellectual treat of grappling with unforeseeable events and working vicariously through others, each of whom has their own will and conscience, she mused to herself. It must be quite the intellectual catnip, with so many variables involved. It's not about the money, it's about the power wielded over others. It's an intellectual snack. Or something more perverse, you're forgetting your recent illness, Baxter added. I haven't forgotten, she stated ominously. Outside, Hansford was busy checking the sight on his rifle, which he placed back into a metal storage box. Lifting out 2 handguns and a knife, which he holstered, he locked the box. Is all that necessary? Baxter asked seriously. If you enter the arena, you've got to expect to fight your own battles, he underlined. Pilgrim felt Hansford's anger towards Baxter barely kept in check below the surface. She couldn't understand his sudden animosity. In an effort to alleviate the tension, she said, Baxter can handle himself. He's armed. How many kills have you made so far, Baxter, my man? Hansford prodded. For Christ's sake, Hansford, have a care. You're beginning to get on my last nerve, she warned, her eyes momentarily sparking. Pilgrim, butt out, Baxter admonished. She jumped into the passenger side of the truck, slamming the door. Baxter continued, In answer to your question, none. Now can we just get on with this? Looks like we're taking my truck, Hansford growled. So what did you find at the house? Baxter asked. You'll see. Donata's house was built into the cliff face overlooking Goetta's harbour. Pilgrim entered first, followed by Baxter, with Hansford bringing up the rear after he carefully surveyed the landscape surrounding the house. The simple exterior was an illusion. The inside of the house opened out, revealing a modern open-planned interior on 3 floors. Floor-to-ceiling windows gave a panoramic view of the harbour. Hansford stopped in the hallway and turned to them both. I've been through the place top to bottom. I didn't find anything, to begin with, until I went to the back of the house. He turned and strode along the hallway, passing various rooms, each more splendid than the last. She had a lot of taste for a young girl, he remarked suspiciously. Pushing through a wooden door carved with grapes on the vine, they entered the kitchen with granite countertops and stainless steel stoves. Located at the back of the kitchen was a small door, which appeared original to the house. Hansford stopped before opening it. The ceiling's pretty low, so mind your head. Inside was a small spiral staircase, which wound down at least 2 stories. He pulled a chain and a single bulb lit up. I think it's advisable we don't all get on the stairs at the same time. He was right. As he took the first step, it creaked loudly. Baxter and Pilgrim waited until he'd reached the bottom. Okay, I'm off. Neath, you're next. It continued to groan as she descended, making her glad to be off it. Baxter quickly followed. Hansford tugged on another light chain, revealing an ancient cellar, partially carved into the rock face. Along both sides of the walls ran row upon row of stone shelving lined with dusty bottles. Now, let's see how awake you are, Hansford said. Do you notice anything unusual about this cellar? Baxter stepped forward, saying, "Firstly, there's too much moisture running down the back wall." He walked over, placing the flat of his hand against it. Pulling it away, he held it up for them to see under the light. "The wall is soaked. Look at the mildew. It's from water leaching from the stone." He looked at the floor, puzzled. "But the floor's only wet about a foot from the wall, but it's dry beyond that. Shouldn't the entire floor be underwater by now, assuming the floor is made from stone like any other cellar?" "Not bad," Hansford nodded. "This is as far as I got before knowing I'd need some trustworthy help." Baxter and Pilgrim watched in fascination as he dug with the heel of his boot, dislodging years of compacted earth. "Baxter, can you go to the kitchen and find something we can dig with? Don't go outside the house," he warned. Baxter quickly raced up the stairs. With the sound of Baxter clanking through drawers in the kitchen above, Pilgrim turned to Hansford. "You certainly know how to show a girl a good time," she said, dodging the cobwebs. "Try me," he whispered seductively. He stepped forward, cupping his hand under her chin, and ran his thumb across her bottom lip. She gave a sharp intake of breath, unable to move. He slowly and deliberately ran his left hand down her side whilst pulling her closer. Leaning down, he very gently began to kiss her. Releasing her, he registered what he'd hoped would still be there, her desire for him. "Hansford," she gasped. His touch was searing as she felt her consciousness slide and a warmth rise quickly up through her body. All he wanted to do was consume her. Struggling for control, he said raggedly, "When we get back to London." "I've got nothing to say," she whispered, cutting him off. A dark rim of blue crested in her eyes. She felt heady, breathing in the warm musk emanating from him. "No, your body normally does all the talking," he said. "We agreed," she pleaded. Hearing the creak of the stairs, she fell back, noting the hunger in his eyes. "This is all I could find. It's all we have, so let's get digging," Baxter stated gruffly. Baxter had been rooting through drawers when he'd felt Pilgrim's conflicting emotions that had seesawed between anxiousness and confusion, quickly followed by the force of her desire. It had made him grab whatever he could find. He didn't have to guess the cause. It was standing right in front of him. Hansford. Well, not on his watch. He'd keep Pilgrim safe, and that meant keeping Hansford's hands off her. "Where are we meant to start?" Baxter asked, taking in a disorientated Pilgrim, before she looked at him, giving him a thankful smile. "Right here," Hansford pointed to an area. "Why there?" Pilgrim asked, puzzled. He pointed up. Taking the bare light bulb, he shone it on the ceiling, revealing an old rusty iron hook. "This looks original to me, probably used to help lift a door or the like, with the aid of a pulley or some such thing." Hansford hurriedly sorted through the kitchen utensils and handed her a meat tenderizer and a steel knife sharpener. "Go over this area and break up the top layers," he instructed. She fell onto her knees and began stabbing the ground with the steel, hammering it with the tenderizing mallet. "Baxter, you get the earth out of the way. I'll start over here." With all three working together, they soon found the groove forming the rim of the door. Scraping around it, they unearthed an old circular iron ring bolted into the wood. "Let's hope the wood will hold," Hansford said. "Find me a rope or something we can use to put through the ring to lift it." As he continued to scrape at the earth on the door, Pilgrim and Baxter looked about them. "There's nothing," she stated, frustrated. Quickly pulling her sweater over her head, she flung it to Hansford. Catching it, he threaded it through the ring, making a large knot at its end. Baxter stepped forward, taking up the strain, as they both pulled as hard as they could, but it wouldn't budge. "The earth is too densely packed," Baxter panted from the exertion. "We need to loosen it up. We need water or—" Pilgrim said. She looked about her at the two of them with a grin. "Or some wine?" she suggested. She began breaking the necks off bottles against the walls before handing them over as Hansford and Baxter poured the contents around the door. "Okay, that should do it," Baxter said. Bracing themselves once more, they heaved until finally it gave way. Pulling the heavy door to the side, they all leaned over the black hole. "Oh, God, what's that smell?" she asked in disgust. "It's not a corpse. I know dead when I smell it, and that's not it," Hansford said, lying on his stomach and feeling around in the dark hole. "Ah, we have a step. Hand me a bottle. I need to find out how far down this goes." Hansford hung a bottle over the hole and dropped it. Instead of it smashing on the ground below, as they'd expected, they heard the unmistakable sound of the dull chink of a ring on glass. Hansford felt as if his skin had become too tight as he realized someone underneath had caught the bottle. They froze, mesmerized by the sound of someone striking a match as the glow of a candle lit the room below. "Do join us, won't you? This looks like a very good year." The crisp enunciation of Mr. Phelps's voice filled the cellar. "And please, don't bother with your guns. I've taken my own precautions, which, I assure you, will be most regrettable and unpleasant should I be forced to use them." Hansford saw several men armed with automatic weapons trained on the floor where he lay. "You could, of course, consider running back outside, but I fear you'd come up against the same problem," he pointed out. There was a momentary silence as Hansford racked his brains, trying to think of any other way out. "Ladies first," Phelps prompted, obviously relishing the moment. Baxter looked like a man carved out of stone. His body was rigid, and it was clear his mind was whirring with different scenarios that might aid their escape, none of which included leaving Phelps alive. Pilgrim descended the stairs. "Now you, Hansford," Phelps invited. Stepping off the bottom rung, Hansford eyed up the men in balaclavas. "And last, but by no means least, Baxter, won't you join us?" Phelps asked. Baxter lowered himself down, taking his position next to Pilgrim, having been relieved of his gun. Their eyes became accustomed to the dim light from a series of candles lining the walls. To their left was a cavernous room, more brightly lit. Inside, the sight which met their eyes was suspended in time. Stretching from right to left lay 5 large barrels on wooden stands, covered in cobwebs and the silt of centuries. Phelps sounded humbled. "Yes, they quite took my breath away. They're magnificent, are they not? Very much in keeping with the style of the Emperor, Napoleon. Please, do step forward and take a look." Phelps trod carefully forward, and with considerable aplomb dusted off the dirt of ages with his silk handkerchief, revealing the soft glow of gold. He continued quietly. "Curiously, they are not placed in sequential order, which leads me to believe they were moved from their original resting place. However, perhaps you would like to study the emblems. They are very fine. One seldom sees craftsmanship of this kind any more." He smiled thinly at Hansford, who just glared at him. Pilgrim gave Hansford a nudge, snapping him out of his mood as he took in the scene in front of him. Phelps's men were already preparing the barrels to be moved as a large fabric cloak was placed around each barrel. Foam from a hose was blown between the barrel and the fabric, where it swelled and hardened to form a barrier. It was finished with a radioactive symbol sprayed through a template on its exterior. Phelps had been observing their fascination at the process and began to explain. As you may appreciate, the barrels are fragile. Soon the foam will be sufficiently hardened to prevent them from collapsing. The trick, of course, is in removing it, which can be done simply using water. We'll have plenty of time for that. And, of course, we would like to discourage any curiosity on the part of the local villagers. Therefore, it's been necessary to hint at the discovery of old nuclear contaminants for weeks. Phelps seemed very pleased with himself. Please, won't you be seated? The intonation in his voice made it clear it wasn't a request. In the middle of the cave sat a black high-gloss table with 4 matching chairs. On the table, a candelabra was being lit by one of Phelps's men, who placed 4 cognac glasses and a matching carafe filled with an amber liquid. Please, take a seat, he beckoned. As he sat down, he pulled a pair of clear latex gloves from his pocket and put them on, seemingly oblivious to the worried looks passed around the table. They each reluctantly took a seat, watching the armed guards surrounding them whilst the remainder busied themselves moving the barrels with a forklift. I'll be mother, Phelps began. Now, he picked up the carafe and poured a generous dose of the amber liquid into each of their glasses. May I propose a toast? Hansford, Pilgrim and Baxter looked at one another as he raised his glass in a prompt to follow his lead. They each reluctantly complied as he continued, To the ineffective mastermind of the Patrimoine heist, I give you Signor Angelo Bianchi. To their horror, Bianchi was yanked in front of them, with 2 men holding him up. Never was a plan more bungled. Phelps inhaled the aroma of the cognac, exhaling a murmur of pure delight. Taking a deep sip, he continued, Although it's beyond crass, one can't but help estimating a single measure is just shy of 35,000 sterling. They each downed the liquid door, suddenly recoiling from the blast of a gunshot. As Phelps lowered his gun, Bianchi slumped to the ground, dead. As he peeled off the latex gloves, placing them back in his pocket, he coldly instructed one of his men. He's to be frozen and saved for shark bait. Take him away. Bianchi's body was dragged away by his heels. Phelps continued, Please, don't be alarmed. There are no such plans for you. It was a regrettable action, but a necessary one. Greed is so unattractive. I mean to say, he set up his own daughter. We cannot sanction that kind of behaviour. So what are your plans for us? Hansford asked, breathing heavily as the adrenaline coursed through his body. It's a pity, Phelps added, but my instructions are to leave you as I found you. So I estimate another 10 minutes spent in each other's scintillating company, and then ciao. Incidentally, should any of you wish to make more of this than is advisable, I'll have Baxter charged and convicted for the murder of Hansford. Phelps rose from the table. Hesitating, he stared down at Pilgrim, knowing the risk he was about to take. Leaning forward, he lifted her hand, gently pressing his lips to her skin. Hansford bolted from his chair, knocking it over in the process, and only stopping when the barrel of a gun was rammed against his ribs. Baxter felt Pilgrim's calm wash over him. She wasn't frightened, just curious. He knew she could afford to be. Any move on Phelps's part to harm her would trigger her true nature and destroy everything, including the house above them. Absolutely charming. Phelps gazed into her eyes, and in so doing, she witnessed him as a boy, dancing alone with a woman old enough to be his mother, to an unheard tune in a decrepit and deserted ballroom. The scene suddenly changed to a wood-panelled office as she watched a man, unknown to her, hand Phelps an envelope saying, "You're to observe only and not touch her by hand." Just as suddenly, the scene changed yet again. She was in a small church. There was a man with greying hair and eyes as black as coal. "My son lives. He must be located." There was a pause before he continued, "You're to kill him, humanely." Phelps let Pilgrim's hand slip out of his. She didn't betray what she'd seen and heard. One thing was obvious. His deliberate intention was to impart significant information. She knew it was to help him or her. Then the emotions that she'd felt from him struck her. He was fearful, which could only mean one thing. There was someone involved in this that he cared about. Monica. Her life was in danger. With the last of the barrels removed, Phelps turned to Hansford and Baxter. "Mr. Hansford," Phelps nodded. Turning to Baxter, he said, "Mr. Baxter, until our next rendezvous? Next time, let's choose somewhere a little less provincial." Baxter shot Phelps a look of pure hatred. After several nerve-wracking moments with the assembly gone, Hansford gently lifted the decanter and refilled their glasses. Taking a large gulp, he blew a breath through his mouth. "Whew, that's good," he breathed. They followed suit. Hansford looked keenly at Pilgrim. "Tell me, you could have taken them at any time, right?" "Pilgrim's life was never in danger," Baxter answered dryly. "I see," Hansford remarked slowly. "You see?" Baxter said with derision. Hansford eyed him carefully. "Not totally impartial now, are we?" "What's that supposed to mean?" Baxter asked. Hansford looked back from Baxter to Pilgrim, his anger rising. "Tell me you haven't," he demanded of Pilgrim. Baxter leapt up, moving menacingly towards Hansford. "If you're saying what I think you're saying—" "Then what? You're going to correct my grammar?" Hansford snarled. Before Hansford could react, Baxter had shoved him violently against the wall. Pilgrim stood up, banging both hands on the table and sending their glasses smashing to the floor. The air seemed to have been sucked from the cave, affecting Hansford and Baxter's ability to breathe. Her eyes sparked, becoming iridescent as they loomed large in her face. "Enough!" The reverberation of her voice caused the carafe to shatter and curtains of dust and earth to fall from the ceiling. Baxter had withstood the mental reprimand far better than Hansford as he addressed Pilgrim angrily. "You get this bullshit sorted out." Turning, he swiftly walked out of the cave. Pilgrim was furious, but she took pains to calm herself. She didn't want to harm Hansford. Hansford stepped back from the wall, brushing down the dust from his shirt. "Your Baxter's just full of surprises. As long as I know where we all stand," he said solemnly. "Baxter and I are business partners, and your insane jealousy is intolerable and dangerous for you. I could go up against him with one arm tied behind my back," he stated truthfully. "You wouldn't be going up against Baxter," she said warningly. "You'd be going up against me. You ever touch him," she threatened, as her eyes involuntarily crystallized. He took a precautionary step back. "You're serious?" "I don't understand," he responded quietly. "Neither do I," she said, and turned, walking out of the cave.